One quick note, just a logistical issue for everyone. We'll primarily be using the chat function throughout the meeting today to submit questions throughout the presentation. Please do go ahead and use that. I do want to do a quick sound check, and we have a very large audience today, but if a few of you can just let me know, are you able to hear us okay here at DWR? Wonderful. So I'm seeing that the audio does work just fine. So at this point, again, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and I will go ahead and hand it over to Kamiar for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning. This is Kamiar Gaveci, Department of Water Resources. I manage statewide integrated water management, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second of two webinars to kind of kick off the public process for updating our well standards in California. I'm really pleased to see that we have about 130 participants today, on top of the 170 or so participants from last week. So definitely a lot of interest, and I wanted to first and foremost thank all of you from taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this kickoff. I wanted to just note right off that the Department of Water Resources and state is very committed to this endeavor. And I know that over the last 20, 25 years, we have had a few fits and starts. We've embarked on updating different types of well standards. And because of limited resources, we were never able to fully complete those endeavors. I'm pleased to say that now, as part of our implementation of this, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and really preparing California for the future with climate change and the like, that we have the resources and the commitment to complete this effort. And the scope of this effort is really the broadest that it's ever been as part of the Bulletin 74 update. We're going to include water wells, including dry or decommissioned wells, monitoring wells, cathodic protection wells, and geothermal heat exchange wells. And this will really allow us to be very consistent and complete in this endeavor. Also, the work that we're doing is reflected in our strategic groundwater management strategic plan, as well as the Department of Water Resources strategic business plan. So all the stars have aligned to make this effort happen. This is going to be about a 2.5 year endeavor. We anticipate that about 2 years from now, we will have a public review draft of Bulletin 74, and that will go out for public comment, and we will incorporate those in a final plan in the summer of 2021. The other unique, relative to what we've done in the past, aspect of this update is the partnerships. So Department of Water Resources is partnering with other state agencies like the State Water Resources Control Board and Department of Toxic Substance Control to make sure that all aspects of this are included. We're also partnering with a number of stakeholder groups, and you're going to actually hear some opening remarks from a few of our partners in today's webinar. The project team that we've assembled is multidisciplinary and from multiple divisions and offices at the Department of Water Resources, plus with our state partners. So we're really trying to be inclusive and comprehensive in how we approach this update. And you will hear from Julie Haas, who's the project manager, a lot more of the details. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Julie and turn it over to her.
All right. Thank you, Camior. And thank you everyone for attending this webinar today and showing your interest in and support of the Well Standards Update. Before jumping in, I want to welcome you to join us in this process, which, as Camior mentioned, will take a couple of years. And I hope to get to know many of you along the way. So to begin in a little bit of an unconventional way, I'm going to share a little bit about my own background. I've lived in Northern California my whole life. I was born in San Jose, and when I was 7, we moved to the country, to the Napa Valley, which is a wine-producing region. I grew up on a small vineyard, but my family isn't in the wine business. My dad is a manufacturing entrepreneur. His early businesses supported the plant nursery industry, and he later shifted to manufacturing industrial mixing equipment. He's in his 80s now, and he and my mom are still running their small business out of their home. And my sister, Amy Haas, is a well-known water attorney in the West. She's the executive director of the Upper Colorado River Commission. And no one is more surprised to have 2 daughters working in government than my father, although he does say he's very proud. When I came to the department in 2010, I had worked for a local government agency, the Napa County Resource Conservation District, which operated much like a nonprofit with funding mainly from grants. I had worked at a mid-size and a national consulting firm. And all my work at those places had focused on surface water modeling. I had studied flood flows, dam breaks, levee breaches, that sort of thing. So when I came to the department, I was looking to try something new. And Mike Floyd, who had a history with the Well Standards, said, "I've got just the thing." So he started me on a project to update the geothermal heat exchange well standards in 2012. And my experience managing that project is how I got this current assignment to update Bulletin 74. When I'm not working for the department, I'm busy taking care of my family. I have an 8-year-old daughter who broke her arm just 2 weeks before summer break. And when I have spare time, which is increasingly rare, I prefer to be in the water, swimming or paddling. So now that I've put myself out there a little bit, my real intention with that is just to make you feel welcome, to approach me and work with my team on this project. So without further ado, let's get started. We've got a great project team. Our partners, our external partners, have renewed energy in this update, and there's heightened awareness of the importance of groundwater protection. This current effort was initiated about a year ago when some of our partners met with our executive office and received a commitment to update the standards. Those partners are attending today, and I'd like to give them an opportunity to say a few words about what this update means to their organizations. So let's begin with Amy Rutledge from the California Conference of Directors of Environmental Health.
Wonderful. Thanks for the intro. So Amy, you've been unmuted. We really appreciate you delivering some opening remarks and invite you to chime in.
Okay, I unmuted myself too, so hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. So my name's Amy Rutledge. I'm the division chief at Kern County Environmental Health, one of the regulatory agencies that is part of the California Conference of Directors of Environmental Health. And the conference, CCDH, really appreciates the opportunity to participate in this process of updating the standards with CWR and the partners that they've put together. Our association covers all 62 environmental health districts in the state of California, and we oversee a wide variety of health programs, including for the most part, the permitting process for well construction in most of those local jurisdictions. We do cover all 58 counties, as well as a couple incorporated cities that have their own jurisdictions. So in the past, like Julie said, the geothermal heat exchange wells, our conference also works with some outside partners, as well as those that are not part of the environmental health function, but still have permitting authority to go through and try to make some changes and update those standards, because they are a bit out of date. So we started that process back in 2010, and we came up with some recommendations. And for the last year, we have actually been working to update even those 2010 updates that we had put together previously. And we feel like this is a really good time to initiate this process, like Kamar and Julie said, in relation to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and how it affects every jurisdiction. So, again, we just really appreciate the process and the efforts that Julie has put forward and cooperated with us in getting this partnership developed and off the ground. So we are here, and we're just as excited as Julie is to get the standards updated.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for those remarks, Amy.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Next, we're going to hear from Dave Schulenberg with the California Groundwater Association.
Okay, David, you're there?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, just fine. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good morning. My name is Dave Schulenberg, and I'm the Executive Director for the California Groundwater Association. The California Groundwater Association was founded in 1948 and is a nonprofit organization which includes membership from all sectors of the California groundwater industry, including water well drilling, pump contractors, manufacturers, suppliers, engineers, geologists, and members of the regulatory community. And the California Groundwater Association is also an affiliate state member of the National Groundwater Association. Beginning in 2010, the association continued and began working with the revision committee that started the Bulletin 74 revision, and this composed of volunteer members from the well industry and the regulatory agencies, meeting periodically and diligently discussing topics and issues of concern in updating the bulletin. And I know that resulted in a draft version 4 document that was issued in 2013. The intent of that, while this document was unofficial, would be useful for the water well community in providing up-to-date information, and eventually would be incorporated in an official revised 74 bulletin by the DWR. And now that this time has come, we commend Julie and the staff at DWR for commencing this undertaking, and continue to offer our assistance and any assistance that our membership can provide along the way. And it only needs to be asked. So we really appreciate being here and being part of this endeavor.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And then finally, Julie.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Finally, Aaron Button with the State Water Resources Control Board.
Hi, everybody. So my name's Aaron. Thank you for the introduction, Julia. So I'm a professional geologist with the State Water Board in the GAMA program. That's the Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment Program. And I just want to let everybody know that we appreciate this opportunity to help this process in updating the well standards and are in full support of the Department of Water Resources as they move through this process. So we identify this as a really necessary step to protecting California's groundwater and offer our assistance if and when necessary. And then just so everybody knows, upon completion of these well standards, we do intend to update our model well ordinance to reflect the most recent well standards documents, in addition to anything else that requires an update. So again, we look forward to working with the stakeholders and the Department of Water Resources through this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
No problem.
Thank you, Aaron. So in just a moment here, we'll shift gears and start walking through the presentation that DWR has developed for the day. I do want to remind folks, if you have questions, we'll be breaking at specific points during the slides to give you the opportunity to use your chat function and send any questions or comments you have in. That said, if something doesn't quite come across clearly, or you need a little clarification during the slides, please do feel free to go ahead and chime in, again, using that chat function, and we will endeavor to answer it as we're moving through the material here. So in just a moment, I will hand things over to Julie, who will start the presentation. Okay, Julie. Just click the kickoff meeting. Share. And then the slide icon down at the bottom. All right, and before we start moving through this, let me just do a quick check and make sure that the slides are showing up okay on everybody's screens. Great, looks like everything's going just fine. So Julie, let me hand it over to you.
Okay. So I want to review our objectives for today's webinar. The first one is to educate interested stakeholders on the Bulletin 74 Well Standards Update process, including opportunities to provide input and participate. And the second objective is to receive input on the proposed process and timeline from you all. So I just wanted to note a couple things, just due to the technical, detail-oriented nature of the standards and the limited time we have here today, we ask that you hold your technical comments and provide them to us by the means that we'll describe later in this presentation. And the second thing I wanted to point out is that we've called this a kickoff webinar, and so it may give the impression that we're starting on day one today. But since our executive briefing a year ago, we've been creating a foundation for the work to come, forming a team, building capacity, conducting some research. So we've been gearing up, and now we've reached the point where we're ready to open up the process publicly and to our external partners and begin the next phase. So here's an overview of the presentation. I'll start out by providing some background on the standards so that we're all on the same page about the scope and purpose of this document. I'll talk about the need for the update. I'll describe our proposed approach to updating the standards and give a general timeline for doing so. And then I'll describe how you can participate in this process and provide us with your input. So what you're seeing here is our legislative mandate from 1949. And I'm actually going to read it to you because it defines the purpose of the standards and is our overarching mandate that guides my team's work. So the department, either independently or in cooperation with any person or any county, state, federal, or other agency, shall investigate and survey conditions of damage to quality of underground waters, which conditions are or may be caused by improperly constructed, abandoned, or defective wells through the interconnection of strata or the introduction of surface waters into underground waters. The department shall report to the appropriate California Regional Water Quality Control Board its recommendations for minimum standards of well construction in any particular locality in which it deems regulation necessary for protection of quality of underground water, and shall report to the legislature from time to time its recommendations for proper sealing of abandoned wells. So since 1949, several new sections have been added to the Water Code, adding more types of wells and detailing the process for implementing the standards. I've highlighted in blue the well standards that are currently in use today. Those were published in 1981, that's Bulletin 74-81, which covered water wells only. Then in 1991, there was a supplemental draft published, Bulletin 74-90, which included updates to the water well standards and added monitoring wells and cathodic protection wells. And then in 1999, we published draft geothermal heat exchange well standards. So as I mentioned, from the water code, we get the purpose of this standard, which is simply to protect water quality. The statewide minimum construction and destruction standards are meant to prevent wells from becoming preferential pathways for pollutant movement. We also get our scope from the water code. It mandates minimum statewide standards for the construction, maintenance, abandonment, and destruction of 4 types of wells, defined in section 13710, water wells, monitoring wells, cathodic protection wells, and geothermal heat exchange wells. And I'm going to show you the definitions, but I'm not going to read them to you, but I do want to point out some unexpected details that might otherwise be missed. With water wells, when we refer to water wells, we always think of water supply wells, but in this definition, as you can see, there are also injection wells that are included in this definition. So, so that means that the well standards really cover things like aquifer storage and recovery wells, and as Kamiar mentioned, dry wells, which are also referred to as stormwater injection wells. And then you'll see some exclusions under A and B for oil and gas wells, wells for dewatering excavations, and stabilizing hillsides. So cathodic protection wells are used to protect underground infrastructure subject to corrosion with the use of a sacrificial anode, which is expressed in this definition, but you might be interested to note that only cathodic protection wells that are 50 feet or deeper are covered by the well standards. And then monitoring wells are defined as for both monitoring of water level and water quality. And geothermal heat exchange wells, these are the types of wells that are used to heat and cool buildings by circulating fluid for heat exchange with the ground in a buried system of pipes. And you'll note in this definition, there are some temperature restrictions, which are meant mainly to separate these wells from the sort of hot geothermal wells that are regulated under DOGGR, the Division of Oil, Gas, and their standards. So I encourage you to review the relevant sections of the water code related to well standards. We've summarized those in this pamphlet shown on this slide, California laws for the 4 types of wells. And this was last updated in 2016. And I refer to this all the time, but you'll see at the beginning there's a disclaimer that if you really want the official law, you should look at this website down here, this leginfo.legislature.ca.gov. And that's mainly, in case there have been updates to the laws since the last publication, but there are none that I know of right now. So in terms of implementing the well standards, this slide summarizes that process. The department develops minimum statewide standards. We submit those to the State Water Resources Control Board. The State Water Resources Control Board then adopts a model well ordinance, which refers to our standards. And then cities, counties, or other water agencies adopt a local well ordinance that's at least as stringent as the statewide standards. And then the local well ordinance, or if a local well ordinance isn't adopted, it defaults to the model well ordinance. And then those are administered and enforced by local enforcing agencies, which we refer to as LEAs. And these are typically the County Department of Environmental Health, but they can also be another a department within a city or within a water agency. So how did SIGMA affect our well standards? So this is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. SIGMA is a very important piece of legislation for our state, moving us towards sustainably managed groundwater. And though there's definitely a strong nexus between SIGMA and the well standards, which is exemplified by our Sustainable Groundwater Management Office's funding of our project. In spite of that, SIGMA did not change or amend the purpose, scope, or process of implementing the well standards. So this slide shows a couple of key points of nexus between the well standards and SIGMA. The first one is that SIGMA defines 6 sustainability indicators, and one of those is water quality degradation. And proper well construction helps prevent the introduction and spread of contaminants in the aquifer, and so it supports that goal. SIGMA also directly reaffirmed the authority of the local enforcing agencies to issue well construction permits. It added another layer, which is it gave the groundwater sustainability agencies authority to regulate groundwater extractions and new well construction to meet the sustainability objectives established in their GSPs. So the LEAs will still permit the actual well construction and conduct the inspection, but the GSA can determine whether the well will have an impact on the overall sustainability of the groundwater basin. And finally, SIGMA and setbacks. SIGMA addresses well interference, so well spacing in relation to other wells, and stream depletion, which relates to well proximity to streams. So we've had some requests to include setbacks between wells and to streams in the well standards, because historically Bulletin 74 has included minimum separation distances from potential sources of pollution. As I mentioned, because the purpose of the well standards is solely to protect groundwater quality, this is outside of the scope of Bulletin 74, but because of the nexus, we are going to continue to coordinate closely with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office team on these related issues, and as appropriate, we will reference applicable guidelines that they may come up with regarding those two issues. And I also wanted to mention, because we had some questions in the first webinar, that well construction and destruction policies are identified as additional elements of groundwater sustainability plans in this act, in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. But if you have questions about SIGMA, specifically about SIGMA, or you need more information, it's probably best that I put you in touch with someone from our SIGMO, our Sustainable Groundwater Management Office, to get those questions answered. So feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is at the end of the presentation, and I'll put you in touch with the appropriate person from SIGMO. So with that, I encourage you, as you formulate your comments and things that you would like recommendations you would like us to address in the update, I encourage you to keep DWR's perspective in mind, because we can only develop standards within our legislative authority, which means we can only address standards as they relate to groundwater protection. And we are updating standards for the 4 types of wells, the water wells, monitoring wells, cathodic protection wells, and geothermal heat exchange wells. But we'll also consider comments regarding other types of wells in the spirit of our original overarching mandate, which is what I read to you earlier. And finally, we are developing minimum statewide standards. So they're not going to address every scenario, and they are intended to be adaptive to a variety of conditions. So I wanted to wrap up this background section by returning to the importance of the well standards. So this figure is also a good segue to our next topic, which is the need for updated standards. So I worked with our graphics office to update an old textbook figure I stumbled upon on the Water Board's website from 1995. I really liked this figure since it shows exactly what we are tackling with the well standards. It shows a cross-section under the ground with several wells constructed to different standards. There are 2 distinct aquifers in this figure. There's the upper and lower aquifers, which are separated by an aquitard. There's a contamination source that you can see in the center of the figure, this yellow underground storage tank, which is leaking, and the brown dots indicate the contamination, and the density of those dots correlates to the concentration of the contamination. Flow in this figure is dominated by this public supply well on the far left, and you'll see the flow lines indicated by these blue arrows, which are trending toward that public supply well. Moving from left to right, the public supply well has an annular seal, this concrete seal or cement seal, through this upper aquifer. And so it's really only pooling from the lower aquifer, and the upper aquifer is sealed off completely. Next to that well, there's a shallow domestic well, which is contaminated. That is tapping only into the upper aquifer. And next to that one, to the right of the shallow domestic well, there's a deeper well that's screened in both the upper and lower aquifers. And there's a continuous gravel pack through this well, which, as you can see by the arrows, it's allowing movement of the contaminants through the annular space and through the well itself. On to the right of this leaky storage tank, there's a very similarly constructed well, which is also allowing contaminant movement. The 3 wells on the right of the figure are all decommissioned wells, or as we refer to them in California, destroyed wells. The two of them that show these wavy lines are basically destroyed by putting clean fill material within the casing up to the sanitary seal depth or surface seal depth, which is usually 20 to 50 feet, depending on the well type. And then that section of the casing is then filled with the impervious material, an approved sealing material, and a mushroom cap is formed, and then it's buried. So you'll see these 2 wells that have been decommissioned with the clean fill. They're very similar except for the length of that upper sanitary seal. And then on the far right, you'll see a well that's been decommissioned by perforating the casing, as shown with these vertical blue lines. And then impervious sealing material has been pumped into the casing and out through those perforations into the annular space. So this figure, I think, shows very well the impact of different well construction and destruction methods on contaminant flow paths and the need for robust standards. So do we have any questions so far?
So at this time, we wanted to take a brief break in the presentation and just see if any of you have questions about the background material that Julie just presented. So feel free to enter those in via chat. Nothing is showing up now, but maybe we can give them just a few moments. All right. In the interest of moving on, if you do have any questions about the background information, feel free to continue to enter those and we'll respond to them at the next break. But go ahead, Julie.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the need for updated standards. As mentioned by Amy and Dave in their opening remarks, the well standards are outdated and they're cumbersome to use because there's 3 separate documents that have to be used together, and there's issues with consistency between them. Because 2 of them remain as draft, there's been confusion about what the actual prevailing standard is. And a lot has changed since 1991. So as we mentioned earlier, the CCDEH and CGA worked cooperatively within the WWTAC, that's the Water Well Technical Advisory Committee of the CCDEH. They completed a thorough word-by-word review of the standards between 2010 and 2013. And then when we initiated this process through the executive briefing, the WWTAC reconvened and revisited those recommendations and submitted a set of 130 comments to DWR in January of this year. I've shown in the lower right-hand corner, I'm showing an example of some of their comments that they submitted. You'll see they provided the section that they're commenting on, a red line markup of the text in the standard, and then they provide comments in the right-hand column about their reasoning behind that recommendation. And to give you a sense of the comments we received, I grouped them into 4 categories. There's the low-hanging fruit, which are simple corrections, the no-brainers, which are slightly more complex, but there's a unanimous agreement on those. There's needs technical review, which those are technical issues that need review, like literature review, or I refer to that sometimes as desktop research. And then items needing further research, and that means I'm referring to engineering research in that category. So those are items that are beyond our current state of knowledge. So some examples of low-hanging fruit. There are updated definitions and requirements to be consistent with current language in the water code, updated ASTM standards references. Sometimes some of the ASTM standards we reference in 7490 don't even exist anymore. We refer to the California Department of Public Health, and those functions are now performed under the Division of Drinking Water. Examples of no-brainers are making the standards consistent with other requirements where appropriate. So some examples of that are the state's on-site waste treatment system standards, which include setbacks from septic systems to wells. The American Water Works Association standards, which are used by the Division of Drinking Water in permitting public supply wells. And then there are the OSHA standards. That's another example where there are requirements related to excavations. Another no-brainer is when an issue is outside of the scope of our standards. Here's just it's a subset really of some of the technical review items that were identified by the WWTAC and confirmed by my project team. So some of the items we're looking into are separation distances from pollution sources, also referred to as setbacks, minimum seal dimensions, including length and thickness, sealing materials and placement, vaults and pitless adapters, surface pad and concrete bases, destruction standards and methods, length of screened interval for monitoring wells, conductive fill and concrete, slot size, drilled hole size, and watertight covers related to cathodic protection wells. So for items that are beyond our current state of knowledge, we will be flagging those and developing a white paper with recommendations to further the state of knowledge by performing engineering research to address those issues. So some observations about the current standards that my team and I have made. The current standards are based on the assumption that conditions won't change. Conditions today will remain the same in the future, which we know isn't true. They were published before the Nebraska grout study, so they assume that sealing materials perform just as well independently of soil moisture conditions. They contain some ambiguous language. Some examples of those are where you have to use judgment about the intent of the well, or whether something is adequately spaced. That sort of language leaves it up to individual users. So, and then they're also based on past best practices and experience that might not reflect current best practices. So I prepared some simplified figures to illustrate practices that are approved under the current standard. This figure shows an active well that's been constructed according to our current standard. It has an operating life of maybe 25 to 50 years. When the well is built, there's no known issues with groundwater contamination. So the upper aquifer and the lower aquifer have no known pollution, in which case our standard says to go ahead and fill the annular space with a continuous gravel pack, which is permeable. And then to use our approved sealing materials to create a surface seal, which is 20 to 50 feet, depending on the purpose of the well. And then there's typically a 5-foot transition seal between the gravel pack and the surface seal. Likewise, for well destruction, our current standards say if there's no known pollution in either of these aquifers, go ahead and destroy the well by filling the casing with clean fill, and then putting impervious material in this upper sanitary seal zone. And the lifespan of this destroyed well is forever. So let's talk about vulnerabilities with this current standard. So I mentioned the Nebraska grout study. This was a seminal study that revealed some faults with the sealing materials that we currently approve in the standards, notably with bentonite slurries. They noticed that, or they observed that many sealing materials desiccate and crack in the unsaturated zone. So we know that there's some vulnerabilities just inherent to the approved sealing materials, as shown here with these orange cracks. We also know that conditions change. So while there was no known pollution at the time of construction, there could be pollution in the future of the upper aquifer. And based on this well's construction, that pollution would be allowed to flow through the well itself and through the annulus. And similarly with the destroyed wells, those issues remain forever. So you have cracks with the annular seal in the upper zone, and then you have pollution able to travel from the upper aquifer to the lower aquifer. So all that said, there's still a lot of good in the current standards, and no one's asked for a complete overhaul. That is, no one's asked us to completely scrap them and start all over again. So building on recent activities, I mentioned our last attempt to update the geothermal heat exchange well standards that began in 2012. Through that process, we became aware of the Nebraska Grout Study, and then we approached UC Davis about doing a literature review related to that. So the GHEW standards update began in 2012, and it was shelved in around 2015 due to a loss of funding. And I estimate that it's about 90% complete right now. So we'll be completing and finalizing the geothermal heat exchange standards during this project. The project itself is foundational for this effort today because we engaged key stakeholder groups through that process, including CCDEH, CGA, and GRA, and others, our sister agencies. We established a stakeholder advisory group, and we identified some key issues and research gaps through that process. So differences between the GHEW update and this current project is that Bulletin 74 has been in wide use for over 30 years. And at the time of the GHEW update, the draft 1999 GHEW standards had not been in wide use. So the issues with Bulletin 74 are well known, and we are really going to rely on our stakeholders to highlight those for us and to address those as efficiently as possible. Also, obviously, the scope of the Bulletin 74 update is a lot broader than the GHEW update. So I mentioned that through that process, we had Nebraska Grout Task Force members who were the ones who developed the Nebraska Grout Study, and they participated in our geothermal heat exchange wells stakeholder advisory group. That study showed, the Nebraska Grout Study showed that many approved grouts were desiccating in the unsaturated zone. So when we didn't receive funding to do an update in 2015, we published a statewide sealing advisory, which is available on our website. And that advisory was reviewed by the Nebraska Grout Task Force members who were serving on our stakeholder advisory group. In anticipation of one day updating Bulletin 74, we jumped at the chance to begin picking up where the Nebraska Grout Study left off when we were told there was funding available to hire a contractor for research. So we hired UC Davis under an interagency agreement to complete a literature review in 2016, 2017, looking at sealing materials in more depth. So they looked at sealing materials and placement specifically in the unsaturated zone. They also looked at setback distances, and annular seal dimensions. They did a survey of what other states and counties were requiring. And now our DWR project team is leveraging that work as we do our own technical reviews. Oh, and I want to mention that that work with UC Davis was done by Kim Miles, who was a graduate student working under Thomas Harder. Do we have any? No?
Hey, it's kind of a quiet group online today. We wanted to take another brief opportunity or give you a brief opportunity to provide any questions. You've just heard a lot of technical information. So if there are any questions, please go ahead and submit those using the chat function.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about our proposed approach and timeline.
Oh, I'm sorry, we do have one question that just came in, Julie.
Okay.
And that is the UC Davis literature review document available?
It's not, it was never finalized, so what we have is a draft copy, but if that person gets in touch with me, I can talk to them about what they might need.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
That's the only question.
Okay, all right. So our vision for the update are updated well standards that are enforceable, protective, and based on current state of knowledge and best practices. So, and then I just want to say there's some subtext here that we're not going to be completing new research under this current update. Progress to date, as I mentioned, we held the executive briefing. We formed a DWR project team. We received and reviewed the CCDH and CGA recommendations. Our project team began desktop research, and we've started our outreach efforts. So the executive briefing was on May 23rd of 2018. And CCDEH, the water boards, and DWR participated. DWR's executive committed to updating Bulletin 74. The water boards committed to supporting DWR and adopting a model well ordinance. And CCDEH revisited and submitted updated recommendations for revisions in coordination with CGA. We have programmatic support for this project with funding provided by the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. The work is being managed and executed by the Division of Statewide Integrated Water Management. And our project team is from multiple divisions within DWR, SIGMO, Operations and Maintenance, the Division of Engineering, DSWIM, and the Division of Integrated Regional Water Management. These are my project team members. There are 10 engineers and geologists on the project team with a lot of great experience. They're located around the state. So for those who aren't familiar, DWR has 4 region offices: the Northern Region Office, the North Central Region Office, the South Central Region Office, and the South Region Office. And so we have folks all around the state. If you want to get in touch with someone close to you, reach out to me, and I'll hook you up with one of our team members in your area. In total, our team has 212 years of professional experience, and I've just highlighted on this slide some of their areas of expertise: design and construction of all well types, groundwater exploration and development, site investigations, geophysical logging, cathodic protection, permitting, groundwater remediation, and destruction. To date, our team has been working on reviewing the CCDH and CGA comments. We broke out into teams by well type and reviewed each comment. And then we identified those items that needed further technical review. A lot of those were already flagged by CCDH and CGA. And then we broke down further into pairs or individuals to do desktop research or literature reviews on those topics. We've also done some capacity building, doing site visits and having brown bags, and we'll continue to do more of that. And finally, outreach. We've been working on an outreach process to involve all of you in this process, to share information. We're holding these kickoff webinars, we've attended conferences, and we'll be giving presentations. We have a new email service with a link. There's a live link here, which I'll show you in a minute, to get announcements and updates. We updated our web page, and I encourage you to visit that as well. The URL is also at the end of this presentation. We're engaged in related activities, notably the State Water Resources Control Board has a technical advisory committee that's developing guidelines for stormwater injection wells, which are also referred to as dry wells. And then the American Water Works Association is in the process of updating their standards for water supply wells. So we're involved in those related processes. We're aligning with our local, regional, and state agency partners, and we'll have future meetings, one-on-one meetings, workshops, and webinars. So sign up for the email service if you want to hear about all of that. This is what it will look like. There's a link on our webpage, and I believe there was a link in the announcement for this meeting. So you'll just enter your name and email address, and then you'll receive notices when we send them out. So our plan moving forward.
We do have a couple of questions, Julie,
Okay.
sorry. So the first, and I think this is sort of a meta question about the overall process, but the question is there any way for the process to be more fluid so that if new technologies emerge, the standard can be updated without a kind of full redo of the update process?
No, but that's a great suggestion. The only thing I can say is that, you know, we did kind of invent this statewide advisory publication when we didn't have funding to do the complete update. So we published an advisory, and that advisory was incorporated by some local jurisdictions into their model well ordinance. So, I mean, just off the top of my head, that would be something we could do, would be to issue advisories or addendums that could then be incorporated at the local level, because ultimately it's the local well ordinance that drillers need to comply with.
And those sorts of suggestions are going to be really important as you continue reaching out to stakeholders.
Right.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So thank you for the comment.
Yeah, and please do sign up for the listserv that was just mentioned so that we can keep you all up to date on things like The next question, and I believe this is one of sort of the level of specificity in the standards, and specifically the individual is asking, will the standards be specific if we're thinking about sealing materials and placement, including increased review of perforations? Will it specify, how many cuts per foot? Will the standards be that specific?
It may be. We're looking through our literature reviews right now. We're looking at the specifics, and we will, we'll draft content, and then we'll have an expert panel to weigh in on that. And of course, on our expert panel, we always have drillers and local enforcing agents represented who weigh in about the practicality of certain requirements. So we walk a fine line between being overly prescriptive in the standard and being performance-based to the extent that the standards are unenforceable. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you just wrote a standard that said build a well that doesn't cause contamination or doesn't act as a conduit for contamination, and that's your standard, that's not enough detail for an enforcing agent to be able to judge the well's construction. So we need enough detail for them to be practically implementable, but we also need to be flexible enough so that it allows for innovation and just adjusting to the specific site conditions.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, so our plan moving forward, this is starting today. We're soliciting your feedback, and we'll take that into account as we have been doing with the CCDH and CGA comments. We'll develop draft content that the expert panel can review. We'll convene an expert panel. We'll develop a public review draft with that panel, and then we'll enter a public review process, final the standards, submit them to the water boards, participate as needed in their, DWR will participate as needed in their model well ordinance adoption process. And then we'll provide training in the updated standards to local enforcing agencies, drillers, and other stakeholders. So goals for the expert panel are to supplement the expertise of the DWR project team, to offer a range of insights and perspectives, to review content and provide feedback, to learn from each other, to engage and achieve a whole greater than the sum of the parts, to have a positive experience, and to inform the advancement of industry best practices and recommend needed research. So these goals are this is just my own brainstorming, and a lot of this is based on my experience with the geothermal heat exchange well stakeholder advisory group, which was a very positive and successful experience, and I hope we have something similar come together with our expert panel for Bulletin 74. So here's our timeline. We're going to draft content this summer, form the expert panel, and design the expert panel process. We'll be designing that process with help from our facilitator. In the fall, we'll convene the expert panel to begin reviewing draft content, and we'll continue to develop content under their guidance. We'll prepare the public review draft the following fall to spring. We'll complete that and release it in the spring of 2021. We'll incorporate incorporate comments from the public and finalize Bulletin 74 in summer 2021 and submit the final Bulletin 74 standards to the water boards for adoption into their model well ordinance in fall of 2021. And when that's complete, we'll provide training and local assistance through the spring of 2022. So ways you can participate, we have a comment portal set up on our website. The link is on our website, where you can submit general comments or comments about specific sections of the existing well standards. So I can pull that up for you. To give you an idea what it looks like. So are you commenting on a specific section of the well standards, yes or no? If you select next, then it'll ask you which document you're commenting on. Bulletin 7481, 7490. We have a combined 7481 and 7490 online document that some of you may be familiar with. And that document has slightly different language than the two separate bulletins, so you might be specifically commenting on that document. And then the draft geothermal heat exchange well standards. And then you can select a well type. Whoa. If I click on it again, oh, there it is. So if your comment is specific to a certain well type, you can select that or all. And then we ask that you document what section you're commenting on as well as you can. I mean, ideally providing the part and section number as CCDH and CGA did. It's very helpful to us when we're reviewing your comment. Enter what your comment is, and then please provide an email address if you're comfortable, because in some cases, you know, we needed to revisit with CCDH and CGA on some of their suggested revisions because we didn't really understand where the intent of the suggested deletion or addition. And so it would be helpful to us to have that contact information if you're comfortable.
And just to note, I know that a few folks were asking for the specific URL to the page. The presentation will be posted and all of these links will be live to the well standards update. But the URL itself is posted in the chat function right now. Feel free to cut and paste that and provide your comments in the comment portal.
Thank you. So I also have this bullet here, review the CCDH and CGA comments. And we have been trying to post those comments on our website with the permission from CCDH and CGA. They've said, go ahead, post them. But we have pretty stringent accessibility requirements now on our web page. And so we've been trying to get those comments into a format that's accessible to everybody. In the meantime, we have a plan to email those out to everyone who's registered for the webinar today and last Thursday, and to those people on our listserv, and so that you can see what CCDH and CGA have recommended. And perhaps you agree with their comments, and and so then you can just let us know that. So if you don't want to submit comments to the comment portal, you can just get in touch with us through this email alias here, bulletin74@water.ca.gov, and request a different way to submit comments. You know, perhaps you prefer email or sending us a hard copy. whatever it is, just get in touch. We'll get you our contact information. But I want to encourage you to use the portal, and hopefully it works well for you, because it really will make, it'll make the format of the comments we receive consistent, and so it'll make it more efficient for us to address your comments. Also, if you're using the portal and you find that there are some issues with it, please let us know so that we can improve it for everybody. And finally, we decided to do a webinar for these kickoff meetings because we got a lot of feedback that people prefer joining online. It fits into their busy schedules better. You don't have to travel. But we really value meeting with our stakeholders in person. So if you have standing meetings with your organizations or agencies, let us know and we can come to you. We can talk about, give you a status update and engage with your members that way. So we're happy to do that.
And to schedule those types of meetings, do they contact you at the email address listed there?
Yes, you can use this email address, and then I've also on the last slide you'll see my personal, my not personal, my work my work
Right.
email. Okay.
Thank you.
So just to summarize, we want your input. So deep, shallow, or downright boring, we dig your input. So this is really, the point of this webinar is really to get you guys engaged and to encourage you to submit your recommendations to us for the update. We want to thank you, and as promised, here's my contact information, my email, phone number. Here's the general email for the update. You might get a response quicker if you use that one because it doesn't just go to me. Here are my team members, and then on the lower right you'll see the URL for our webpage.
Thank you. So we did have one final question. You touched on this just a little bit earlier in the presentation, but one of the participants asks, are there certain areas of further research needed that have already been identified by the user-mentioned committee, but I'm assuming DWR or the expert panel? And specifically, they have the example of such as selecting seal materials based on soil moisture, or is that
right.
level of specificity down the road?
That is one of the areas of research we identified through the geothermal heat exchange well standards process. Because the Nebraska Grout Study, what has been published of that study is really the first phase. And that first phase showed that almost everything was failing or underperforming in the unsaturated zone. They continued to do research, but those subsequent phases of the Nebraska Grout Study were not published. And so we did bring the Nebraska Grout Task Force members onto our stakeholder advisory group. And, they helped us formulate the standard, the draft standards for sealing materials that way. But we really had envisioned following up, kind of picking up where that study had left off and looking in more detail at sealing materials and placement, particularly in the unsaturated zone. So that may come up again. I mean, when we had UC Davis look into this, they didn't find a whole lot more information. So it's likely that will come out as a recommendation for needed research. So thanks for the question. Anything else?
That's the extent of the questions.
Okay.
I know a number of you had asked for the URL, and I would just really recommend people visit that webpage when they have the opportunity. There's a lot of information, and I know that will continue to be updated as the process moves forward. So please do keep that in mind. And then one person just wanting to thank you personally for leading the effort. And they say
You're
that
welcome.
we're in good hands with you leading it. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
all right.
Yeah.
Any other closing thoughts? Otherwise, I think we're getting close to wrapping up here.
No, I mean, our comment period is open-ended. So you're welcome to submit comments anytime. But I encourage you, if there are things that you have on your mind, you've been working with the standards for a while, and there are issues that you want to see addressed, please submit them sooner than later to give us more time to look into them and address them.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for attending. Just a final reminder, since the question's been asked a number of times, the presentation will be posted, as will a video and audio recording of this webinar today.
Right.
All right.
All right, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you. Great.